mathematics, the complex procedures associated with rendezvousing two spacecraft in orbit. And Gemini 8, Armstrong and Dave Scott, that's what they were going to demonstrate, a rendezvous and a docking. And the docking was with a large unmanned device called an Agena upper stage. The Agena upper stage is like the size of a school bus, or if you want to think of maybe about the size of the third stage, a little bit smaller, but big compared to the tiny spacecraft that Armstrong and Scott are in. But we launched the Gemini. It proceeds through the sequence of maneuvers that allow it to approach and rendezvous and dock with the Agena, and it happens perfectly. And this is cause for celebration in the control center. They rummage around in the drawers to find the big cigars, you know, that we're going to light up the cigars. But then reality sets in. This dock configuration, this big Agena, little Gemini, begins a slow tumble. Not supposed to happen. And they work on this problem for quite a while, trying to solve it, and nothing works. They have to, finally the ground tells Armstrong and Scott to back away from the Agena because that's where the problem is. Well, it turned out the problem wasn't with the Agena, the problem was with the Gemini spacecraft itself. It had an open throttle in one of its reaction control jets, the little things that hold attitude, and that open throttle was causing rotation. When you're attached to the Agena, you barely notice it because of the mass of the Agena. When you separate from the Agena, now you notice it. And we begin to tumble at the rate of about 1 tumble per second in orbit. If you're in that situation, you're going to pass out and you're going to die. So be thankful this is not your flight. We're talking about Apollo 11 now, not Gemini 8. But Armstrong does one thing. He has the presence of mind to make a critical decision. He engages an attitude control system that was only supposed to be used during entry, and uses that system to counterbalance the force of the stuck throttle, and after about 25 minutes gains control of the vehicle. And they have to abort the flight immediately, meaning they have to splash down at the first available opportunity, which happens to be in the Western Pacific, about 500 miles to the east of the island of Okinawa. They splash down in the water.
Oh, wow. Spinning
around in space, you know, no problem. Bobbing around in the ocean for 2 hours waiting to be picked up, that's a problem.
Yeah.
And the astronauts got desperately seasick from that, waiting to be recovered.
I know.
So anyway, that's your Gemini 8 flight. Last story about Armstrong occurs about a year before the lunar landing. We had to have a means on Earth to practice lunar landings. We could do that in a simulator, but it wasn't quite the same thing. We wanted to be up off the ground, falling to the ground, you know, looking around for a landing site. So we built a lunar landscape up at Ellington Air Force Base, about 5 miles north of here. We built this device called the Lunar Landing Training Vehicle that is sort of like a lunar module. Remember the lunar module? It's got 4 big legs at the bottom. Well, that's what this has. A big engine above it, and the astronaut sitting at the top, this time with a hand controller, and the hand controller controls jets out of the extremities of the legs. Main engine fires you up off the ground, engine cuts out, you start to fall, and then you engage the hand controllers and you control the landing and you maneuver around trying to find a suitable landing site. So that's the practice. Armstrong gets up to altitude in one of these things, main engine cuts out, vehicle begins to tilt. Now it's supposed to happen. Now if you're the pilot of this device, you've got one of two choices. You're either going to work the hand controller and try to stabilize the vehicle heads up, or you're going to hit the eject button. And those are your only 2 choices, right? Now, piece of advice to you in case you ever find yourself in this situation at some point in the future. If this thing continues to rotate all the way through 180 degrees, so that instead of being heads up, your head's down, don't eject then. Armstrong ejects sideways, meaning that he had about 1.5 seconds to spare. That's how close he cut. Story doesn't end there. We pick up the story about 2 hours later. We're over in Building 4. Over there. Where the astronauts have their offices. The astronaut whose office is across the hall from Armstrong gets a phone call. The guy on the other end of the phone line says, "Hey, what happened to Armstrong?" Yes, I said, "What do you mean what happened to Armstrong?" The guy on the other end says, "What do you mean? What do you mean what happened to Armstrong? He almost killed himself today. The LLTV wreck, big explosion. What's going on?" Astronaut at the other end of the line says, "Buddy, I don't know what to tell you about this. Armstrong's across the hall eating lunch." Hangs up the phone. Crank phone call. He walks across the hall. Neil, you won't believe this. This is rich. This guy said you almost killed yourself out at Ellington today. Armstrong says, well, that's right. I had to come back to fill out the accident report. Nothing much to say about that, except that's the guy you want for your pilot.
Yeah.
Knows exactly when to hit the eject button, moves on to the next task, no panic, no, no fright, nothing like that. Anyway, that's Armstrong for you. Now, we passed Apollo 12, Apollo 13. I'll take questions about those flights at the end of the tour if you want to talk about that. Normally I would cover them in a tour, but we're going to focus again on the Apollo 11 flight, the first lunar landing. Second stage lasted 9 minutes into the flight. It's going almost orbital speed. It's going to burn up in the atmosphere over the eastern Atlantic. It's going to pretty much be destroyed, entering the atmosphere, unrecoverable. The first stages are not recovered either. Third stage engine is going to fire for about a minute. That's going to get us into Earth orbit. We're going to stay in Earth orbit about 1.5 orbits, getting ready for the decision to continue on to the moon. And so from here, I'll take you to the top of the third stage, and we'll pick up our story from up there.